The palace cover-up surrounding Princess Leonor's recent silence. Something felt different, not because Princess Leonor said something controversial, not because there was a dramatic announcement from the palace, but because she didn't say anything at all. And in today's world, silence can sometimes create more headlines than words. Over the last several days, royal watchers have been analyzing every appearance, every photograph, every official update, looking for clues. Not clues about what Leonor said, but clues about why she hasn't said more. And honestly, that's where this story gets interesting. Because whenever a future queen becomes unusually quiet, people begin asking questions. Questions the palace may not want to answer. Or maybe questions that don't even have answers yet. Either way, the silence itself has become the story. Now here's what caught my attention. Most royal controversies begin with a statement. This one began with the absence of one. And the longer that absence continues, the bigger the conversation becomes. Because human nature hates a vacuum. When information disappears, speculation rushes in. And that brings us to the question everyone seems to be asking. Is there really something being hidden? Or are people simply seeing mystery where none exists? Before we go deeper, if you're new to Leonor's story, subscribe. I post every day. Because these stories aren't just about royalty. They're about image, power, perception, and how public figures navigate a world where every move gets analyzed. Now let's continue. One thing I've learned covering royal stories is that the public often focuses on what happened. But I focus on what didn't happen. What wasn't said, what wasn't explained, what wasn't clarified. And when it comes to Princess Leonor, that's exactly where the conversation has shifted. The future Queen of Spain has spent years carefully building a public image. Disciplined, professional, prepared, focused. The royal household has consistently presented her as someone gradually stepping into larger responsibilities. So when communication suddenly becomes limited, people notice. Not because silence is unusual for most people. Because silence is unusual for institutions built around messaging. Think about it. Modern monarchies are essentially communication machines. Every appearance is planned. Every photograph is selected. Every speech is reviewed. Every public moment carries meaning. Nothing is accidental, which is why even small changes attract attention. Now here's my personal take. I don't think the most interesting question is whether there's a cover-up. I think the more interesting question is why so many people immediately assume there is one. What does that tell us about public trust? What does that tell us about modern media? And what does it tell us about the impossible expectations placed on young royals? Because Leonor isn't just a princess. She's a symbol, a future monarch, a public figure growing up under extraordinary scrutiny. And symbols are rarely allowed to be quiet. That's something I think people forget. Silence looks very different when you're one of the most recognizable young women in Europe. If an ordinary university student disappears from public discussion for a few days, nobody notices. If a future queen does it, headlines start appearing. Comment sections explode, theories emerge, and suddenly everybody becomes an expert. That's the environment Leonor operates in every single day. Now let's zoom out for a moment. This isn't happening only in Spain. Look at the British royal family. Every public appearance by Prince William gets analyzed. Every photograph involving Kate Middleton becomes a national discussion. The smallest detail can generate weeks of coverage. It's almost as if modern royal families are living inside a permanent social media algorithm. The audience always wants another update, another photo, another statement, another explanation, and when that update doesn't arrive, people start creating their own. That's where I think this story becomes bigger than Princess Leonor herself. Because we're witnessing something that happens across every major public institution. Silence creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates narratives. And narratives spread faster than facts. In some ways, the palace may be facing an impossible challenge. If they speak, people dissect every word. If they stay silent, people dissect the silence. Either way, the conversation continues. And here's another observation. The timing matters. Leonor is entering one of the most important periods of her public life. Every appearance now carries greater significance than before. Every decision is viewed through the lens of her future role. That means even routine moments can suddenly appear meaningful. And once that process begins, everything becomes a potential story. A delayed appearance, a missing comment, a different schedule, a change in visibility, all of it gets interpreted. Sometimes accurately, sometimes not, but always intensely. Now let me ask you something. What if the silence itself is the strategy? Not because something dramatic is happening, but because saying less sometimes creates more control. Think about that. In a world where everyone is constantly reacting, posting, explaining, and defending themselves, silence can be powerful. Silence can redirect attention. Silence can avoid unnecessary controversy. Silence can keep the focus on long-term goals instead of short-term headlines. That's not a conspiracy. That's communication strategy. And if there's one thing royal institutions understand, it's strategy. Now, does that mean every question has been answered? Of course not. Public curiosity is natural. People want transparency, especially when it comes to public figures. But curiosity and certainty are not the same thing. And I think that's an important distinction. One thing I've noticed over the years is that the biggest stories often begin with the smallest details. A glance, a gesture, a missing appearance, a few unexpected days of quiet. Then suddenly everyone starts connecting dots. Sometimes those dots belong together. Sometimes they don't. But the process itself becomes fascinating. Because it reveals how people think, how media works, and how modern audiences interact with public figures. If there's one lesson I've learned from following royal stories, it's this. The public doesn't just watch events. They watch patterns. And when a pattern changes, even slightly, people notice immediately. That's exactly what we're seeing now. Whether this period of silence turns out to be significant or completely ordinary, it has already accomplished one thing. It has made people pay attention. And maybe that's why this story keeps growing. Not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. The unanswered questions, the missing pieces, the possibility that there might be more beneath the surface. And until those questions are resolved, the discussion will continue. So what do I think? My honest analysis is that the reaction tells us more about the modern media environment than it does about Princess Leonor herself. We've become accustomed to constant updates, constant access, constant information. When that flow stops, even briefly, people become uncomfortable. And that discomfort creates stories. Sometimes bigger stories than the original event ever could. What have I learned from all of this? I've learned that silence is never just silence when you're a future queen. It's interpreted, analyzed, debated, questioned, and transformed into a narrative all its own. Whether that's fair or not is another conversation entirely. But it's the reality of modern royalty. And for Princess Leonor, it may be one of the most important lessons of her public life. Not how to speak, but how to remain silent while the entire world talks around you. And that might be the most revealing part of this story.